good question. How am I going to get an incumbent out of office? Well, we have to have a brilliant strategy flawlessly executed in order to defeat an incumbent.
Is he going to be willing to debate?
Well, I don't know. My guess is probably not. You know, he's going to want to stand up in front of the Bloomfield Hills Post Office and talk about his important step in making sure you can buy stamps at Woodward and Long Lake now. That's a big issue in this race, I'm sure, for him. I have to run a smart campaign that focuses on the issues. I have to be organized with volunteers who are willing to work in their neighborhood and in their precinct to talk about the need for change. I have to be able to raise sufficient amounts of money to be able to put our commercials on television and do the mailings and things of that nature. And I have to stay focused on the issues that I think are important. Now, as I said before, he's going to want to get away from those. He's not going to want to talk about his vote on health care. He's going to want to talk about all the good stuff he's done for green energy and things of that nature. Well, I'm not against green energy, but I also know we can't put all our eggs in that basket, as some of these guys want to do, as if that's going to either solve our energy problem or, fix the unemployment situation. So I got to keep focused on the main issues. I've got to talk about a governing agenda, a positive agenda, and I think if we hammer that away and we can raise a little bit of money to get some commercials on the air, and the timing is right, that's what we have to
And you've
go
got
for.
enough people back of you
Almost.
that are important.
Almost. I don't have you yet, so I'm working on it. That's why I'm here today. But yeah, it is you really have to keep growing the organization every day. Yeah, it's not about having all the important people. It's about having, as many as you can possibly get. Because everybody's important in this process. And Republicans have had sort of a tendency to run campaigns where they'll have another cocktail party and people write these big checks and then we do, another round of commercials. Well, commercials are important, but I think having motivated, concerned, even angry people who are willing to do something about it, because, politics and democracy is not a spectator sport. If you're going to sit on the sidelines, then you get what you'll get. But I guarantee you that if you make a contribution, and I don't mean that necessarily monetarily, whether it's your time, your talent, or out of your pocketbook, you can affect the process. And that is so very, very important, that everyone has a stake in this. And if they get involved, they're going to move that in the direction that I think they want it to go. So, we've got a lot of hard work ahead of us, though, I guarantee you. Yes, sir.
Yeah, going back to the deficit, which federal program are you planning to reduce or curtail or cut? Or which waste are you going to cut?
Sure. Well, first of all, I think there's waste in every one of the departments, but I'm going to give you an example. Now, I'm a big supporter of our military, of the men and women in the military. I like to say that I'm a hawk, I want us to be strong because I know peace through strength works, but I'm also a cheap hawk, okay? I don't think you can just give the Department of Defense just everything that comes down the pipe. I'll give you a specific example. The federal government is engaged in the creation of this new aircraft fighter, the F-35, which is the next generation of military fighters. It's a very impressive machine. But because of a lot of back and forth in Congress, when they originally let the contract to build this airplane, they gave the contract to build the engine to a company called Pratt & Whitney. Well, the guys over at GE, they didn't like that very much because they wanted that contract too. And so the Congress said, well, I got an idea. Why don't we let both of them build an engine? So now instead of having one engine for one fighter plane, we have two engines for one fighter plane, paying twice the cost. And that cost to develop that is upwards in the neighborhood of $4 billion. And that's real money. And we have to start with things like that and say, you know what, we don't need an alternative engine program in order to get this airplane off the ground and do what we're asking it to do. And the government is ripe with that sort of thing. Another example, the federal government could save $60 million over the next 5 years if it didn't pay the salaries of its full-time labor folks. Virtually the entire federal government is unionized, and we subsidize the union reps as taxpayers by paying them their full-time salary to do their union work. I don't think that's necessary either. That's a small thing in the scheme of things, but I tell you, everything counts. When you're at home and you don't have as much money as you got bills, you look at everything. It may just be a subscription to a newspaper. Well, sometimes those things have to go, and the big ticket stuff has to go too. So it's going to take that level of detail, really getting in, drilling down department by department, appropriations bill by appropriations bill, to come out of this with less spending than we started with. So that just a couple of examples.
Another issue that I have with the Republican in general is that when they get to Congress, they behave like gentlemen. Are you planning to fight the like of Wexman, for example, just to toss a name?
Well, I mean, I think you have to, there's a certain level of decorum that is necessary. You can't jump over the podium and punch a guy in the nose.
The other
there are
side
times
do.
when you'd
The
want
other
to.
side do.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I tell you this, you know, I mean, I grew up here. I mean, I was born in Detroit, raised, grew up in Farmington, just down the street. You know, went to public schools, went on to Michigan State. You know, I'm not saying I lived in the ghetto or anything of that nature by any stretch of the imagination, but we were kids who, you know, regular kids, and, you know, we knew what it took to get done what we had to get done. There's no, you know, we're not going to play by some fancy set of rules. We're going to engage when we need to engage, but by the same token, I think it's important that we don't go there simply to be a fly in the ointment and say, you know, just become non-productive. I want to make a difference, and I know there's a time to get aggressive, and then there's a time to find ways that we can get things done together. But it really means knowing who you are, what you stand for, and making sure other people know that as well. Yes, young lady.
I know you touched on the auto bailout when you
Yeah.
were speaking earlier. Is that something you supported? Or?
Well, let me tell you how I felt about the auto bailout. You know, we, as I said before, in September of last year, the housing crisis or bubble burst, creating a huge problem in the financial markets in Wall Street and what have you. And the whole sort of house of cards started to collapse, and the auto industry, which had a history of making a lot of bad decisions and what have you, well, they felt it right away. But you know what? The federal government had a lot to do with it by creating this situation with Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, which created this problem. The federal government had also put layer upon layer upon layer of additional regulations and costs on the domestic auto industry, making the production of an automobile very, very difficult. Now, I'm not excusing bad decisions that were being made by management at our companies, no question about it. And so what I'm saying is, yes, the federal government had a role in the problem and should have had a role in the solution. But where I disagree is the way they went about it. Instead of guaranteeing loans to allow the auto companies to get what they needed to get over the hump, basically the federal government took complete control of General Motors and Chrysler to a degree, though the structure was a little bit different. They forced these companies into bankruptcy. Dealers who for generations had been in business were in some cases given 2 weeks notice to close their shops. And now I'm reading in the newspaper that the government is going to have an IPO to issue General Motors stock. I'm thinking to myself, doesn't it seem the world's turned upside down? The government is selling their shares of General Motors to us. I don't think we needed to have an auto czar and a payroll czar and everything else that this president has created. We should have given loan guarantees to these companies so that they could work out their own problems. And I would have supported that, but I wouldn't have supported what we had, what we saw happen. And the jury's still out. I mean, I think we're seeing real progress in General Motors and hopefully in Chrysler as well, but we're not sure how it's going to turn out. Yes?
To play out that question a little bit,
Mhm.
maybe